Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, here from a brief week-long hiatus after the end of the season. This will be your first episode of the off-season. My name is Tommy, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how are you doing?
Good. Welcome, everybody, to the off-season version of the Father-Son Packers podcast. We are still following football, maybe not as intently.
Still rooting against a few teams, I must admit. Not quite rooting for as many teams as I was earlier in the year.
I haven't quite figured out who I want to win the whole thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Buffalo, I would say. But anyway, we are here. We will be doing one of these episodes every single week for the rest of the offseason, as opposed to our usual 2 a week in season, breaking down essentially how the Packers season went, what we think will happen going forward with some of the Packers players, the draft, different free agency and contract decisions that need to be made on the Packers' part. And we're going to start off this whole offseason thing kind of with a bit of a retrospective on certain positions and a bit of a looking forward at those positions. We're going to split it into 4 episodes over 4 weeks. We're going to do 2 episodes on the defensive position split up, and then 2 episodes on the offensive position split up, kind of reviewing how each player played, what we thought about the coaching, what we thought about the approach, and kind of what we think going forward that position group might look like and how we think the actions will be taken on each of those players. We are starting today with the defensive line, edges, and linebackers, the front 7 on defense. Dad, how are you feeling about these positions just kind of off the bat? How do you feel like the whole front 7 did as an entire run-stopping unit this year with the 31st ranked run defense in the league?
Yeah, we could talk about that a little bit, but I have to say, overall, kind of disappointing.
Yes.
Some of it was the edge group didn't do as well because they lost Gary, their best player, for about half the year. But the linebackers did not do as well as you might have hoped, for at least for much of the year.
And the D-line
was regressed a little bit, even though they've still added more to it.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember at the beginning of the year when Joe Barry was like, we think we got a special defensive line, and it turned out that they were just dominating Jake Hansen and Royce Newman every single play in the
Exactly what I was
offseason?
going to say. It's like, man, this D-line is just crushing the Packers' offensive line in training camp.
Wow, they can't keep them out of the backfield.
Yeah, it's because it's Hansen and Newman. Now we know why.
It's like they can't stop them out there. Wow. It's like, and yeah, the D-line was pretty disappointing overall.
It just shows you how bad that O-line was that we trotted out in the beginning
week
of
1.
the year.
And really just threw a few games away.
They were getting absolutely crushed. That
by
O-line,
this D-line.
By a D-line that finished dead last in adjusted line yards.
Can you tell our listeners what adjusted line yards are, since we are going to be talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's a football metric from Football Outsiders that is trying to break down what part of the run game is being given up by the defensive front, as opposed to the part of the run game that's being given up by the linebackers and safeties. Those are the open field yards, as opposed to the adjusted line yards.
And as I understand, it's essentially how much push they're giving up to the offensive line, right? It's like how much they're getting reset.
Right. And some of it, I think, is going to be how. I think one of the things that feeds into that, though I don't know all the details, I'm sure is going to be yards till first contact.
Mm-hmm.
And things like that.
It's an amalgamation of a few different
feeding
numbers.
into the adjusted line yards.
Yeah, but
so,
anyways,
yeah. If they I don't know what does it count as infinity if the nobody on the defensive line lays a finger on the runner?
Well, whichever metric you look at, whichever way you slice it, the D line was not great this year.
There are certain times where I think a running back could have gone to infinity against this defensive front. Just kept running out of the stadium.
They certainly needed the stop Forrest sign at the end of the end zone for a few of these.
Yes.
But anyway, since we're talking about it, like we said, we're going to go through 3 different position groups: D-line, edge, and middle linebacker today. Dad, let's start with the D-line. Let's talk a little bit about their performance this year, how we think they're going to look going forward. And you want to kick us off with the guy that makes everything go, Kenny. And honestly, I thought a bit of a down year for Kenny this year.
A little bit, yeah. So I've organized the D-line part as by sort of snap count per game, and sort of front line as well. frontier players first. And Kenny, of course, is the only player on the team who's ever shown the ability to be a top-tier defensive lineman on this team. So he's set. The other thing that's interesting about this, and I'll just say it right up front, our top 3 snap counts all were drafted in the same year, 2016. Clark, Reed, and Lowry all came out in the same draft.
Yeah. And
so Kenny's 27, Reed's 30, and Lowry is 28. So Kenny was young when he came out.
Yeah, he was only
led
like
the team
19.
with 807 snaps, 348 against the run, 459 against the pass, for 47 snaps a game. In terms of his counting stats, he finished the season with 5 sacks and 45 pressures. So, like, in terms of pressures per snap count, that's about 10%, and 18 run stops. Just to compare this to 2021, which wasn't even his best year, there's a sharp drop in the number of pressures and the number of run stops. He had 68 pressures in 2021 compared to 45 this year, and 31 run stops compared to 18 this year.
Mm-hmm.
He also
you could really feel it out there. It's like you could tell just watching that it didn't feel quite as impactful this year. I agree.
Right, and he also I'll talk a little bit about some of the. I think some parts of the year are wondering what was going on a little bit. His PFF grade overall was only 66.4. That's just a little bit above average, and he had the lowest run D grade of his career. And overall, by PFF, he was only the 41st ranked interior defensive lineman. And he was the best on the team.
Yeah.
He ranked 41st overall in the league for the season. Though he was still 15th in pass rush grade by PFF. So not too bad, but his run grade was outside the top 50. I didn't actually look to count where it fell. Mm-hmm. And looking at his run defense grade more generally, it has dropped 2 years in a row under Barry. So the this year was worse than last year, and last year was worse than the year before than it was under Pettin. This year, he really struggled in the middle of the season from weeks 8 to 12, with 4 of the 5 games grading out as a poor or below average overall. So was there some kind of undisclosed injury? Was something going on that they didn't talk about that was dragging his performance down? But he played better at the end, and his best game of the year was against Minnesota. And his second best game of the year, just to mention it, was against Tampa early in the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember. I mean, I think everyone's best game on defense was against Minnesota, if we're being honest, which is pretty cool in my opinion. But
I have another one in here. I think one other of the D linemen had the best game of the year against Minnesota. So he's entering the 4th of a 5-year contract going in 2023. He'll be in the 4th year of the 5-year contract he signed most recently, and he's set to count $24 million on the cap in 2023 and 2024, about the same. But they could convert some of his $13 million salary in 2023 to a signing bonus, to push some of the cap back to 2024. It'll make this coming year easier, but 2024 worse. Yeah. And there are reasons why they might do this for multiple players, actually.
I think they're going to hit the restructure button on pretty much anyone they can this offseason.
And you know why you would do this? And why you could get away with it, it won't actually hurt the team all that much, is because you're thinking the 2024 total salary cap hit for the QB position is going to be substantially lower than 2023.
Yeah.
And so you can have everybody on the team on both years, and everybody except the quarterback position is going up in salary in 2024.
And the thought is just essentially one of Rodgers and Love will not be here in 2024. It doesn't matter which one, but one of them will not be, and the cap hit will be less. For me, I think just kind of tacking on to what you were saying about Kenny, it's so hard because he's not playing with anyone who's any good next to him for me to put a particular amount of blame on him for the 31st ranked run defense. He was worse this year. He was getting beat, especially in that Titans game, I think was the worst game of the year for him. It felt like, at least. He's getting beat by a backup center like several times in that game, which just can't happen. And
yeah, actually, so let's see. Kenny, his 2 worst games were Buffalo and the first Detroit game, actually. And the Titans game was not as bad.
I still think that was his worst
Despite
game personally.
The eye test.
When you think PFF doesn't take into account context. Like, you're playing against a backup center, you should be dominating. Like, you should be kicking his butt, but instead you can't move him, which I think was a little disconcerting for me. Beyond that, though, I mean, for Kenny, it's just he's your best player on the D-line. You need to get him some help. You hope that next year Wyatt is able to give him some support and that they're able to give Wyatt more snaps. I think that helped a little bit as the year went on, giving Wyatt some more snaps. The D-line was a little bit more successful. Getting, I think, Slayton more snaps at nose tackle as the year went on and putting Kenny over to 3-tech was also pretty good for him. I thought he was a lot better over there than he was at nose this year. And some of that is, like, he's playing at a lighter weight under Barry. And maybe at this lighter weight, he's not fully equipped to be playing like right over the center anymore and taking on double teams all game. Maybe he's just going to have to move over to 3-tech and play Slayton as a full-time nose and just see what happens from there and then play Wyatt with him. Maybe that's the move. But I think that's probably what I would do going forward. I mean, you need him. He's probably still your second best, third best player on defense.
Yeah, it seemed like we saw more of him at like 3-tech or, in the B gap, or over tackle than we had over B gap or right over the tackle than we had in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, they need more from him because of the lack of like production from everyone else. It's like the expectations are high, and he's been able to do it for several years, which is very it's commendable for him. But I think definitely a down year for him, back-to-back down years in the run game. You don't know how much of that is Barry's scheme since both those years are under Barry. It's just tough. But Dad, let's move on to our next D lineman. For Jarran Reed, he's 30 years old. He's finished 7 years in the league now. He was second on the team in snaps, 705, 310 against the run, 395 against the pass, 42 a game. PFF grade of 61.9, slightly below Kenny, right around average again. Finished with 4 sacks and 33 pressures and 28 run stops. Like Kenny, he also struggled in the middle of the season, weeks 9 to 13, and had his best game against Miami with 4 pressures, a sack, and the forced fumble that essentially swung the game on Christmas Day for the Packers when Miami was going to drive before the end of the first half. Contract was only a year. Void years are going to count $1.5 million on the cap in 2023. But he did make some comments about liking it in Green Bay, although I will say any player who's currently playing on a team and wants a new contract is going to say that. He did say he felt like he found another home there. I thought Reed overall played pretty well. I think he was kind of high variance. The beginning of the year, I was like, this guy's no good. This guy's no good at all. I actually thought that, I know PFF has him struggling most like weeks 9 to 13. I thought he was really bad to start the year and like borderline, like not playable, like could not make a play. And then kind of near the end of the year, that Miami game, the Minnesota game, he was pretty good if I remember correctly. And just like closing out the year, he closed out the year strong. But Dad, what did you think about Jarran Reed this year and whether or not you think they should bring him back?
I guess by the end of the season, where he was playing a little better, I was more in favor of bringing him back, and maybe for kind of a similar amount as he made this year, which, and I don't think because he's already counting $1.5 million on the cap this coming year because of the void year, that it might not cost that much more. Maybe it only costs, a few more million this year. Then, of course, they're probably, then tack on a void year for next year. Though he is already 30. So that's something to think about as well. So he's a little bit older than Kenny when he came out
I wouldn't
college.
Expect them to bring him back because of the age thing. And because that they're expecting probably to give more of his snaps to Wyatt. I would expect them not to bring him back. He was fine this year. He wasn't. I think if he had played really well all year, you could convince them to bring him back. But I don't think he was quite good enough to, at his age and with a guy waiting in the wings behind him, to earn like another contract with Green Bay. He'll tag on somewhere, but I just don't think it's with Green Bay necessarily.
Yeah, it kind of depends on how many spots they feel like they need to fill. This offseason with talk about him and the next player on the list, possibly both moving on. So like 2 of their top 3 snap counts could be gone.
But we were complaining about them being 2 of the top 3 snap counts. So is it really
for much of the year
necessarily a bad thing? Because I mean, we were. Let's go to the next guy now. Dean Lowry is the next guy. For anyone who didn't know, he, I think, has been kind of the punching bag of Packers like Twitter and Packers like media about the struggles the D-line have had over the years. He's fine. Like, he's okay. He's average. He gets beat up a lot in the running game. I don't think he's particularly good. He'll eat some innings. He's an inning eater. He's an NFL inning.
He's a middle reliever.
Like, that's kind of what he is.
He's a middle reliever.
Like he's just kind
coming
of running
in there,
around out there. Especially
especially
this past year, though. Like, don't you think it's I don't think it's a coincidence that the year that Kenny is not as good, Dean Lowry completely disappears. Like, he is nowhere to be found on the football field this year. I thought he was a ghost. Like, I don't think I remember a single play he made.
Yeah, so
seriously, do you remember a single play Dean Lowry made this year?
He had 1 sack, and I can't remember what it was.
He had a sack this year?
But
are we sure?
He had 1 sack. By PFF, he had 1 sack against New England.
Oh, man. I don't remember that at all.
And so it counts as like probably. I wonder if it was one of those like.
Speaking of that 1 sack, take us away on the Dean Lowry train.
Okay, so he's also he was drafted by the Packers in the same year as Kenny. Kenny was a first rounder, and Lowry was he a fourth rounder? Fourth rounder. He had pretty good RAS grade, actually, I think, coming out of college. But anyway, he played 482 snaps, the lowest snap count since his rookie year. 285 run, 197 pass. So a lot more runs snaps than pass snaps. And 32 snaps per game. So now we're looking at the top 3 D linemen. Clark 47 per game, Reed 42 per game, Lowry 32 per game. And he only played 15 games because he missed the end of the year. The second lowest PFF grade of his career, only 59.3, though it's similar to 2020 and 2019. He kind of basically league average, as it were. He's been right about beginning his career is a little bit above league average, and he's been basically league average ever since in overall grade.
And that's exactly how I view him. He is a league average D lineman. That's just kind of what he
said. It's like middle reliever. He comes in, starter can't finish the game, eat up some innings, so eat up some snaps. Try not to fall behind. His best. So he only.
But we're giving him the third most. We're giving him the third most snaps on the D line.
So that means he's like your number 3 starter.
Yeah, it's not good.
And so he had his 2021 was his best pass rush year. We had 6 sacks. This year only had 1 sack and 17 pressures. So in terms of pass rush snaps, that's like 8.6 pressure rate, which isn't terrible.
Which is similar rate to Jaron Reed, which I forgot to say. He was around an 8.4%. But I never saw hardly any impactful plays on tape for Dean Lowry this year. Last year, I actually thought he had a really good year. I actually thought he was pretty solid last year. This year, it was like, can we just get this guy off the field because he can't play?
And you also compared the snap rate, but his like run stop only 18.
Oh, he's not a good run defender
compared
he's
to Reed's 28. He's never been a very good held up very well in the run.
Yeah. And I mean, and
that kind of bears out over his career in terms of stops.
And while we're talking about it, can you remind me his contract percentage, or contract situation? Like, they can get off of him this offseason, right?
Well, Lowry's already done.
Oh, that's right. Because that was
ended.
Last season was what they were talking about. They can just get rid of him if they wanted to. And
he's got
he's
got just a void year left. That's going to count $3 million on the cap this year. So it may be possible to bring him back. I don't know how much he's going to command on the market.
That's true.
But if they bring him back at like league minimum, vet minimum, he'll cost almost nothing more in the cap than he does now. That's the thing about like both Lowry and Reed, their contracts have basically expired. So that means you're down to Clark Slayton and Wyatt and Jonathan Ford.
Yeah, and honestly, if it's those four, and then you just add like a rookie into that mix, I feel okay with that as the position group going forward. But since you mentioned him, let's move on to TJ Slayton. I actually was really impressed with what I saw from Slayton this year. He didn't play a lot to start the year since he was kind of stacked behind Clark, Lowry, and Reed. But once Lowry went down with injury, I think that when they moved Slayton to kind of more of a fuller time nose position and then let Kenny play that 3-tech like we talked about earlier, and then had Reed and Wyatt rotating in like with them, I actually thought that D-line combination was so much better than what they had been trotting out until that point. And Slayton, I mean, he just finished his second year in the league. He's going into his third year. He's on a rookie contract. He's cheap. Didn't have any sacks this year, but had 5 pressures and 11 run stops. Most of his snaps were from the nose, so the fact that he wasn't quite as productive in the pass game as he was previously doesn't really... It's okay to me. He's not really there necessarily for pass rush. The fact that he's giving you anything there is kind of just some like a added bonus. I mean, he's a 5th round pick. Like you can't expect like all of that much from him. But I just think overall as a unit, the D-line was a lot better when he was at the nose. He was actually better in run defense this year. If you want to just referencing PFF run grades. Obviously PFF grades aren't perfect, but there's another data point. Beyond that, I mean, just eye test wise, he's got a lot more there in the fact that I think he's better at nose tackle than the other players are at 3-tech. And then Kenny's better at 3-tech than any of the other guys are at 3-tech. So just kind of, exactly, just kind of moving them around, getting your best guys on the line. I wouldn't mind at all if going into next year, Slayton's the starting nose, and then you got Kenny and Wyatt on either side of him. I don't know how you feel, but that's at least how I feel.
That sounds good to me. Yeah, you could mention that Slayton kind of started off rough and then got better as the year went on with his best game against Minnesota.
But he was hardly even getting any snaps early in the year.
Yeah,
like he never played.
And then he finished the league 4th in snaps per game with after the first 3 we already mentioned. And from there we basically go on to the only other player who really got any kind of snaps at all in the D line, and that's Wyatt, the rookie. Who he's a little old for a rookie, 25 years old. He'll be 25 in March, I should say. He's almost 25. And he had 14 snaps per game compared to Slayton's 18, so close. But over the last 6 games, it was up to 21 per game. So he was actually started getting a decent number of snaps there at the end. With 2 sacks, 8 pressures, and 5 run stops. Mostly playing, I think, at 3-tech. Though they might have put him at the nose on a few snaps here and there.
It's so criminal how few snaps they gave him. It's criminal.
It took so long for him to get snaps, but then like 4 or 5 of his last 7 games, he had over 30 snaps. They finally started giving him more.
Yeah.
His best game was against Detroit at the end of the year, and 3 of his last 5 games were well above average to elite in PFF grade. So and he really poured it on when he had the chance.
It's
on
just
snap per snap basis.
It's just so dumb that it took them that long to play a first-round pick that was clearly better than any of the other options you had. Like, when he played limited snaps, you saw he was better than Lowry. You saw he was at least as good as Reed. I don't understand how you pick him in the first round. You watch him be just as good or better than the people ahead of him. So if you're not going to play him to develop him, and you're not going to play him because, like, he's better than the other guys, why is he not playing? Like, you're developing...
understand.
I don't get it.
What's going on in practice or something. I don't know what's going on.
And I mean, he's a rookie. He's on a first-round contract, so he's going to be making, like 2-3 a year. It's going to be cheap for a little while now. I think he's definitely one of the foundational pieces to build along the D-line. He didn't have, like, an elite rookie season, but he was very solid and showed a lot.
He was efficient when he got the opportunity.
And I mean, he's an older rookie, so you kind of hope that for him. I think the fact that he didn't play had me very worried earlier in the year. I was like, we got drafted a 24-year-old rookie who can't get on the field? That's a yikes. But the fact that he was able to do some nice stuff, like, along the D-line late in the season, kind of, like, I'm not as worried anymore. I think that he should if he doesn't start next year, I don't know what we're doing. And that kind of brings us to let's
if he doesn't start next year, that's kind of a catastrophe.
Well, let's talk about the coaching. Let's talk about coaching since we're talking about this. Like, Jerry Montgomery is the D-line coach. He's been with the Packers since 2015. in some role along the D-line. He was the assistant D-line coach until 2018. And then he was the D-line coach from 2018 to 2021. And then he is now the D-line coach and run game coordinator this past year. I don't understand. So it seems like they're not moving on from Joe Barry based on what Matt LaFleur said. If they're also not moving,
I'm hoping that's coach speak. If you want my honest opinion, I'm hoping that's coach speak.
It's been like enough weeks now where it would have happened if it was going to happen. Beyond that, though, if you're not going to fire him and you're not going to fire the run game coordinator for the 31st ranked run defense in the league, when you have like a Pro Bowl nose tackle, an all-pro linebacker, a first-round pick at linebacker, and then a first-round pick at D-line that the position coach is not playing or developing, instead playing Lowry and Reed, and like I'm not taking shots at Reed. Reed cleaned it up as the season went on, but the reason that why it wasn't even more impactful at the end of the year is because he didn't play him at all to start the year. I don't understand what Jerry Montgomery's decision-making process was when you're getting killed in the run game all year and you're the run game coordinator. You're not changing up what you're doing at all. The only reason he played Wyatt is because Lowry got hurt. Like, he did not make that decision himself.
Right. Decision was taken. Adam says, let's talk about how that run game has been run defense has been coordinated the last few years. That wasn't all when he was doing it, but
he's been the D-line.
Since he's been the D-line coach in adjusted line yards by Football Outsiders.
Yeah, and so reminder, this is just a metric that looks at how the D-line is performing against the run game, which I know he's only been the run game coordinator for 1 year, but he's been the D-line coach for 5 now.
Right, so these are the yards that the defensive line are theoretically responsible for. So, league-wide ranking, under Montgomery's leadership, they finished 27th, 31st, 24th, 26th, and this most recent year, 32nd.
Yeah. And you have... I know it's tough because, I will say, not a lot of clay to work with outside of Kenny, but you have a Pro Bowler there. You can't be... his average of his years is like 28th or 29th in the league. Like, you're down there with the Texans. You're down there with probably not even the Texans. You're down there
not even the Texans. I don't know who the terrible run defenses are. The Chargers were bad for a while.
Yeah, but just think, over a 5-year span, you have had one of the worst D lines against the run continuously.
Yeah,
and
it never gets better.
And even when they give you clay to work with, like Wyatt, you don't play him. So, what is it you would say you do here? Because you've had...
to use an Office Space quote.
Because you've had bad D-lines the entire time you've been coaching here. And I know you have not had a lot of draft picks to work with. You've had Kenny Clark. You have not developed anyone else. You had Kingsley Keke. He was okay. He's gone now. Slayton's been all right. There's some development there. There's something to see there. But at some point... you got to put out a good unit because they've had a bad D-line for what feels like ever, like since Mike Daniels left, we were talking about earlier.
Yep, which was about the same time that Montgomery took over as the D-line coach. So which was which? This brings us to future need. Do you see? I could see, and I don't know. Do you think the Packers possibly going for another interior defensive lineman, possibly with another pass rush? Guy like Wyatt is to be. If there's a stud there when they pick at 15, it wouldn't be my first choice of position. I would prefer an edge rusher or a safety, or if by some good fortune we get wide receiver the guy from TCU,
Quentin Johnson.
Quentin Johnson, yeah. What's the chance of that? What's the chance of him lasting until 15?
Probably not high. But we're going to talk a lot about the draft later. I think future needs, they need another guy here. I don't know if it needs to be a first rounder. I think as long as it's not a third rounder, we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Especially if they don't bring Reed or Lowry back. They've got to just add at least one more
body.
person.
They just need a body there because... And
maybe they'll do the Gutekunst special of drafting one player and signing a vet for league minimum.
Or they'll do the Gutekunst special of drafting 3 guys late. And just be like, when do you win the job?
A fifth rounder, a 6th rounder, and a 7th rounder.
But yeah,
that's how they got Runyon.
I just don't understand how you can essentially trot back this entire defense with no changes next year. You're not having changes anywhere. The only change might come if Jerry Gray gets hired away somewhere because he's had a couple interviews for defensive coordinator positions, which would be losing essentially your best position coach. But anyway, that's kind of all we had for the D-line. Let's move on to the linebackers. Let's move on to the edge rushers. We'll do edge rushers first. I would say I wrote up this part. I'll start it off. I think that the edge rush group was pretty good this year considering they had to deal with a lot of injuries and the fact that the third guy was kind of either a rookie or a guy they signed off the street, and we'll get into it. Let's start with Rashawn Gary. He's 25 years old. He's going into his 5th season on his 5th-year option, fully guaranteed. This past year, he only played 8.5 games due to the torn ACL he suffered against the Lions in Week 9, so that's definitely something we're going to have to talk about.
Stupid AstroTurf.
Such a dumb game. He had 38 pressures, 6 sacks, 17 run stops, which is a PFF. All these are PFF sourced stats. Stops is like essentially PFF stat that's like the offense did not succeed on the play. I believe it's calculated off success rate. So like a 1-yard run would be a 1-yard run on 1st and 10 would be a stop, something like that. But like a 2-yard run on 3rd and 1 would not be a stop. For instance,
The whether something is stopped depends on context.
Exactly.
Down and distance context.
So a bit down in all those stats, but you do have to remember he only played 8.5 games. Had he kept up this pace for an entire 17-game season, he would have actually been 5th amongst edge rushers in the league in pressures and 2nd amongst edge rushers in the league in run stops. So he did have a career-high 5 missed tackles this year. I think it just is what it is. Obviously, you don't like to see a career-high in missed tackles when you're only playing half the number of games, but c'est la vie. I think overall, though, he was clearly the best player on defense this year. They really missed him as the year went on when they had practically no pass rush against Detroit especially. I don't think it's a hot take to say he was their best player. I think my hot take is he was their best player on either side of the ball, which I don't even know if that's that hot of a take.
That's not that hot of a take.
And he's going to be on his 5th-year option coming up. He's making $10.9 million guaranteed, counting the same against the cap. The thing about him, though, Dad, that is interesting is normally this would be the offseason that you would get your extension going into your 5th year. What are they going to do now? Because he tore his ACL on November 6th. So you're assuming he's probably going to miss 7-8 weeks next year?
Right, he's going to miss like half of next year.
And so
what timing?
What are they going to do regarding that contract extension? Because they might need to just. I think they might need to just extend him and hope he heals all right. Because I don't think you can let him get to free agency. Because there's going to be a massive bidding war if he has a good year next year. If he looks like Rashawn Gary next year.
Yeah, it might be safer. There's risk.
There's a lot of risk. That's the problem.
Before he even comes back. Or they could try to, 4 games in. Or it'll depend a little bit on how soon he comes in. Because you also feel like it's going to take like 4 or 5 games to really know how well he's playing. Because if he like comes back mid-October and he has like 3 or 4 bad games, that's not that surprising.
No.
It took Elton a while to start playing up to normal. And a lot of people do when they first come back. They're not at their normal level, and it takes a little while to get going, even after you start playing.
And even if you didn't have like a catastrophic injury you were recovering from, if you don't do something for 10 months, like you're gonna look like you haven't played football in 10 months. Like, I mean,
he's been sitting on the couch. I
guess someone give me that couch.
Somebody give me that couch.
That's a quote from The Fighter if you've ever seen it. But yeah, so I think this would be a no-brainer, like full extension, like give him as many years as you can give him a bunch guaranteed, but the injury just makes it so complicated. I think they should extend him either way this offseason, but man, I don't know, like what do you even pay him? Like, I don't know what you do here.
Yeah, I don't know what the going rate is for,
essentially
the going rate for a top edge is over 20.
I think
like
they would
24 or something, or maybe it's more now.
I think it's more now. I think
it might be more now.
I think they would
haven't looked at the market yet.
I think they would have had to given him essentially like the most money ever for an edge, possibly. Like if he had been healthy coming into this offseason. But now I just don't know, because like the point of drafting him was you were going to draft and develop him. Like you brought him along very slowly. You have to extend him. You can't just let him walk now after he's had like essentially 2 good years or 1.5.
That would be a colossal failure if you draft a guy you think is going to take 2 years to develop, and then you only get 2.5 good years out of him. It's like,
yeah.
What are you doing?
I think we're landing in the same spot where they have to re-sign him, and I think they might just have to like pull the trigger on that over the offseason with him injured and just hope for the best. Because otherwise, I don't think you want to get into a bidding war in the open market, because that would be awful.
Yeah, and what their edge group looks like
without him, and that's something. Okay, let's move on. Do you want to talk a little bit about Preston?
Right, because we can talk a little bit about Preston, who is now 30.
Yeah,
and going into his 9th year in the NFL, and he was their best edge rusher he was their number 1 edge for the second half of the year.
Yeah,
he played all 17 games, which is like, that's a Preston thing. He's like missed 1 game in his whole career.
1 game his whole career.
The dude is a machine in that regard.
And that's why I'm not super duper worried about him being 30, but he is 30. Like, he's old.
Yeah. He played. So he had 42 pressures, 10 sacks, and 20 run stops per PFF. A lower pressure total, than the previous year before, significantly lower, 63 last year. But he managed to avoid his even year bottom out, as he had been doing, like the really good year and the bad year, and the bad year. And
that's why I was looking. I was like, wow, he was a lot worse than last year, and I don't care, because he was way better than he was in 2020. Like. Yep. He was much better even year wise than he had been previously under the Packers.
Yeah, and as usual, he did a decent job against the run. 14th in the league in run stops amongst edges, and that's been one of the things he's been good at for most of his career, using his size, long arms to set a good edge against the run.
Yeah, and I mean 42 pressures, 10 sacks. Like, I mean he did not go into this year expecting to have to be the number 1 edge, and then he had to take that role on. I think he had a fine year.
Yeah,
I was pretty pleased.
I think he was critical to the year. Can you imagine if they didn't have if they didn't have him either?
Goodness, I mean they would have for sure addressed the edge group. The edge group needs addressing anyways, even with him there. But if they didn't have him, they would have been toast. They would have been absolutely sunk.
Yeah. So the contract signed a 4-year, $52 million extension last offseason. Count $13 million against the cap this coming year, and they, like, similar to what they could do with Kenny, they could restructure him, and in Preston's case, save $6.6 million against the cap in 2023, which then essentially then counts in the next year. If you think of a cap as a 2-year exercise, a lot of the times for these, it's a net neutral, but depends what else is on the books. In which of those years. So it could be, if 2023 is a tighter year, then you do the restructure. If you think 2024 is going to be the worst year, then you don't.
Yeah, and I think like you could hypothetically cut him after June 1st and save like $10 million. I think that should not be anywhere near on the table, just because they need edge snaps so badly. It would be like
Enagbare and Jonathan Garvin as your top 2 edge rushers. If they don't at the beginning of the year, because Gary's not going to be ready,
and whoever they pick, because they have to.
If they get somebody in the first round, those are what I'd thinking would be, if there's a top edge still left at 15, then that is probably the smart pick.
And as we've established, just because they pick someone in the first round doesn't mean they're even going to play them. So
we need to develop this guy for another year or two.
Yeah. We're in win now mode, but we're going to develop this 24-year-old rookie for it. Oh, my goodness. It's so stupid. But beyond that, you already mentioned him. Should we move on to Enagbare? Because I think Preston, it's very simple. He should be on the team next year. He should be essentially, he's going to have to be your number 1 for like the weeks until Gary gets back up to speed, hopefully, knock on wood. But once he's back, once Gary's back, that is, I think that Preston is one of the better second rushers in the league. I think that's fair to say. And just having him on the team they're better with him than what they could do with the money they would save by like not having him. I think it's very easy.
If you saved $6.6 million, you think about, can you get somebody as good as Preston for $6.6 million?
It'd be 10, but
it depends how you do the
If you cut
whether
him
you do a
post-June
post-June first.
Yeah, but you should
But
not.
you're not going to get somebody who can for the $10 million.
No.
This is part of what I think about recutting. Like, can you replace them? Can you improve the position with the money you have left over after a cut? And so that's the thing. You always got to consider, like, oh, we could save, $4 million if we cut player X, but the player we would get with that $4 million would be much worse than the player X we cut. So why would you do it?
Yeah, and I think that Preston is one of the better second rushers in the league when he's the second rusher. It's just he was kind of forced into a role that's abnormal for him, and we're getting odd year Preston next year, which is also awesome.
So
he's got 60 pressures a year in odd years. Is all I'm saying with the Packers. But Dad, do you want to take us away on Enigbari? Because that's my guy right there. He was my draft crush.
Yeah, well, you want to go? You want to go ahead with Enigbari?
No, he was yours. We're going every other. But wait, no, it is me, huh? It is me. That's right.
You started with Gary. Yes,
you're right. He's 23 years old. He's going into his second year in the NFL. He had 25 pressures, 3 sacks, and 12 run stops this year per PFF. Considering the fact that he didn't crack 40% of defensive snaps until week 7, and then didn't crack 50% of defensive snaps until week 10. I would say when Gary got hurt, I would say that's super impressive. 19 of those pressures were from week 10 onwards. So if he had kept his, if he essentially kept that pace and been a starter all year, he would have had 41 pressures, which would have been 4th amongst rookies and top 50 in the league. Not bad at all.
But which is the metric that he basically was at the top of all rookies?
I
for
think
a lot of the season. Was it pass rush?
I think it's pass rush win rate. He was like top
the best
of the
of
league.
all
rookie
rookies?
edges. Yes, and just like he was kind of in a part-time role this year, he got pushed into being the second guy. If he's your third guy, I'm ecstatic. I mean, he's making hardly any money at all. Going forward, I think that he is a very exciting player. He's everything that you would hope. He's a perfect third edge rusher right now. Maybe in 2 years he's ready to be a second edge rusher. Maybe. I think that's kind of the ceiling for him. But if you're getting a third edge rusher as a rookie on a 5th round pick, and then he's going to get up to maybe hopefully like a second best pass rusher on a team, like as time goes on, that's something to be very excited about from a 5th rounder. I'm very happy with how he's been so far, and just like if he had been a starter all year, he would have been one of the best rookie edge rushers in the league statistically. And I think he already, like by certain other metrics, pass rush win rate, like we talked about, I think he's already near the top of the league. So I mean, I don't know about you, I'm super excited about him because he was one of my guys coming out of South Carolina.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think he doesn't have as many tools as a lot of people would like. But I think what it is, he just knows how to use the tools he has. Like he's got long arms. He's like he knows how to do like the stiff arm rush, and find spots to win, and just knows how to. And he was effective in college as well.
He's just not very athletic, but he's just good at football. He's one of those guys. He's not athletic really
he's
much
not
at all, but he's good at football.
He's not a super high tester in the underwear Olympics, but plays a good game.
I think someone tweeted because he had a nice preseason, like late in the preseason. He kind of came on in camp and started just he had like a 2-week span where he was like kicking everybody's ass in practice. And someone, I don't remember who was tweeting, I was like, he's not good in shorts, but he's a gamer, which I always think is just like one of the funniest things. But it's kind of true for him. He's not like a hyper athlete. He's nowhere near the athlete Gary is. He's not as long as Preston is. He's not as big as Preston is, but gets the job done. And if he's your third guy, I feel super comfortable with that going forward. I don't know how I feel about him being the second guy to start the season next year. I think they should still add to that spot, especially with Preston getting older. Have a guy you can bring along and take over Preston's spot. Because if Enigbari is your third guy for a little while now, I feel great about that.
Yeah, I think it's that you're at the stage now, especially in Preston's career, where you need to start draft and develop, and get ready for the future. You need to be proactive. All right,
do you want to take us away on Hollins? Because I was at Hollins is one of the most pleasant surprises of the year.
That was pleasant. They got cut by the Rams. It's like in his 5th year in the league. But
super athletic, like really good RAS, and then it's just wears 47, which is such a weird edge rusher number, and then is good. Like it doesn't make any sense. It defies all logic.
Played 6 games in Green Bay and part time, but took up a lot of edge snaps in that time. He had 9 pressures and 3 sacks, three sacks, and that he's going to eat.
Yeah, I was going to say it works, but yeah, I mean, just he didn't play a lot, but he did a lot with like the snaps he got, and they really needed him once Gary went down.
Yeah, it was a huge thing they were able to add him this year. It's kind of this past year's Whitney Merciless, as it were. They get him in the
that's
middle,
a
middle
little disrespectful to Whitney Merciless.
Oh, absolutely. It's like, yeah, but this year was a little disrespectful to last year too.
Yeah, this year was a little disrespectful to the Green Bay faithful.
So in terms of like how this year went.
Yes.
They couldn't get anything unfortunately, Merciless decided to hang him up. But
yeah, he would have actually been super useful this year. But anyway, Hollins.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind bringing him back. He's now, since they signed him to a part-year contract, he doesn't have any void years or anything because they picked him up after getting cut. So he's not counting on next year's cap. But I would be in favor of them bringing him back at this point for another edge rusher.
Yeah, and he can play little teams. Like, he's a very good athlete. I don't see why they don't bring him back if he wants to come back. And I mean, I would be totally in favor of it because he was very productive. Like, he was a quality NFL player. I have no idea why the Rams cut him.
I don't understand that either. Yeah. I mean, I don't
why
think
cut a good football player? It doesn't make sense.
I don't think it even saved that much money for them.
I think it was just for roster spot.
Was it just to tank their... Well, but why would they tank their draft position? Because it's going to the Lions anyway.
Who knows why the Rams do what they do? But they won a Super Bowl, so I can't really talk. But yeah, I think Hollins was great this year especially for what he was, a mid-year addition, and just came in and was like a very viable third edge rusher just off the street.
By the end of the year, he was the third edge rusher for sure.
And that kind of brings us to Garvin, who I think was very disappointing this year. I mean, I was surprised he made the team. I think we were all a little surprised he made the team. Part of that was Tipa getting hurt. He hardly played, really. He's 23 years old, so he's still pretty young despite it being going into his 4th year in the league. He'll be 24 by the start of next season. Has 1 year left on his current contract at $1 million. If they cut him, it's no real dead money. Like I said, he hardly played. He got jumped in the depth chart by a 5th-round rookie, and then got jumped in the depth chart by a guy straight off the street. They elevated practice squad guys to play over him. I would be surprised if he's on the roster next year. They play him on special teams for some reason. He's not very good on special teams. It just kind of I don't see him being on the roster next year. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Possibly not. He had 0 sacks, 7 total pressures, and 2 batted balls, and 0 run stops.
Yeah.
And he didn't play much. He had a lot of single-digit games with single-digit snaps. Or no, not single-digit. I'm sorry, single-digit run. But, teens. Yeah. Teens and a couple in the 20s. He had a little run of 3 games in a row that were pretty good against Detroit, Dallas, and Tennessee. But a lot of well below average games at the beginning of the year and then again at the end of the year. And it's a little disappointing because he's actually pretty athletic. He tested pretty well.
And he was really young coming out of the draft. I mean, I thought here's the thing: 7th-round pick, that's the perfect type of player to take in the 7th round. It didn't work out. It is what it is. I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time there. Let's talk a little bit about the coaching and the overall positional group thoughts. So this was Jason Rebrovich's first year as the outside linebacker coach in Green Bay after the departure of Mike Smith last year to the Minnesota Vikings. I thought he did a really nice job, especially considering the fact that he had big shoes to fill because Mike Smith is a very well-renowned outside linebacker coach around the league. Gary had a career year. Preston broke the pattern of having bad even-yeared seasons. Enigbari looked really good right off the bat, so developed him quite well. And then Hollins came in and made really good contributions. Like, all the things we talked about, I think at least some credit goes to him for, developing Enigbari, giving Hollins the situation to succeed, getting Gary to that next level, getting Preston to come in and be, in shape this season.
Yes.
And I would say he did a very good job. especially with big shoes to fill. I was very worried about this position group with Mike Smith leaving, but it worked out.
Yeah, I think they definitely should keep him. He's done enough to keep his job. The players were improving under him. He had, rookies. It's several players playing above what they had in the past or could be expected to do. And I think from that he should have one of the more secure defensive position coaching jobs on the team. But it sounds like they're all going to be secure.
Yeah,
unless they leave for other jobs like
Gray,
like Gray or not on the defense, but will Bisaccia leave?
Yeah, Bisaccia getting interviewed for the Colts job today, which is what we just saw. Overall areas of improvement, like we said, we just think they need another guy. But Dad, getting a little long here. Let's move on to the linebackers. Let's take this home. Do you want to start us off with Campbell?
Sure, I can do Campbell. I can start with Campbell. So, he was their first team All Pro in 2021. He's not as good this year. He's will be 30 going to next by the time next season rolls around, and it's going to be is his eighth year in the league. He missed 4 games due to injury, played only 13 games. It's still unusual for him. I think he's mostly been pretty healthy in his career, which is something that Gutekunst is not every time, but sometimes he's taking chances. But he's done a decent job at getting players like Preston and Campbell and Amos who don't miss many games.
And Billy Turner.
Though he had some injuries at the end a little bit.
Yeah.
He had his highest missed tackle rate. Right. That was weird at the beginning of the year. It's like he already had more missed tackles in the first 3 games than he did all last year.
He had the second highest missed tackle rate of his career since his rookie year.
10.1%.
Yeah.
And but he did have the same number of tackles for loss as he did last year in 4 fewer games. So
yeah,
in terms of those impact plays, he was still creating some. And I feel like at the end of the year, he was looking a little bit more like himself towards the end of the season, playing a little bit better when he came back from that injury. I don't know if you felt the same way or not.
Yeah, I actually thought that his best play was right before he got hurt against Buffalo. I felt like he started the season kind of weak. Weeks 1 to 4, 1 to 5, and then the Washington game where he had a pick 6, and let's see, what was the other? There was another one that I was thinking of off the top of my head. Let me see if I can pull it up here really quick. The Washington game, I thought he was really good. I thought the Giants game was really good, and I thought he was fine this year overall. He had just set such a high standard for himself. He missed 1 tackle all of last year. It's not really sustainable. And the fact that he kind of regressed in his missed tackle percentage, the fact that it was the worst since his rookie year, I'm not too worried about it just because I think he will positively kind of get back up to his mean. He's always been a good tackler. So I'm not entirely totally worried about that. There were times where he was in the wrong gap and he looked a little slow, but I think for the most part he was solid to good this year. It's just he was so great last year that we couldn't help being a little bit disappointed by the season he put out here this past year.
Yeah, and some of it there's slow reactions where you not be in place, you be in the right place. How much of that is maybe having a rookie next to you is contributing to that, where you're losing some of your attention to what you would normally be on because you're trying to coach in the middle of the player next to you. And maybe as Walker gets more accustomed to what he's doing, and maybe some of that, what they changed to have Walker just basically read and react helps Campbell focus a little bit.
If you remember, Campbell last year was he played almost all of his snaps as the only linebacker. They played so much penny last year. And maybe that's just something he's better at, which isn't ideal because it's not like they're not going to play Walker.
Right. So, it is an interesting thing that, as you said, he is, wanted to be Batman.
Yeah. And he's still what he meant by that is he wanted to play Mike, not play Will, which is what they play Quay at Will, they play Devondre Mike. So he's still getting what he wants. It's just last year he was the only linebacker and he kind of excelled heavily in that role. And so you wonder how much of it is maybe he's not as good in 2 linebacker, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, the role is different, but you got more help. But you hope that as he and Quay kind of get used to each other, they kind of develop more chemistry inside and it's a little less clunky, I guess, and they improve each other's play and lift each other up. Only time will tell.
Yep. And so in terms of his contract, he, you know, part of what they did with the Devontae Adams money was one of the things they did was bring back Campbell, signed a 5-year, $50 million contract, and he'll count $8.1 million against the cap in 2023. And it can be restructured where you convert some of the salary to a signing bonus, so you can push some of the money to a later year to save $2.7 million this year. That's one of the things they do. Or in, like, I don't know what kind of emergency, full teardown, they cut him to save $5 million.
Yeah, I don't think they do that. I think what happens is they play him he plays this next year. If he doesn't improve like from this past year, then I think next offseason is when you're going to have that tough discussion. I mean, like they say, every contract in the NFL is a 2-year contract, and then we'll see. I think that you're not really going to do a lot with that money that you would get this offseason. I do think they probably restructure, but you just hope he's better next year, and that the fact that he gets more used to playing with Quay is helpful to him. Do you want to talk? Should we talk about Quay?
Sure. Let's go on to talk about Quay Walker. They're the first pick for the Packers in last year's draft. Is going to be he's 22, going to be 23 at the start of next season, going into his second year. He played all 17 games, and the first player to be ejected from 2 in 10 years, 15 years?
15 years? First player to be ejected from 2 games in the same season in the past 15 years. So that means Vontaze Burfict never got, not even Vontaze Burfict was ever ejected this many times in a season. That's what that means, folks.
Oof.
It's not good. It's not good. But beyond that, he was pretty good otherwise.
He led all rookies, as you said, in PFF stops with 41. He had 12 pressures to lead all non-edge rookies. The third in coverage grade amongst rookie linebackers, and the lowest QBR when targeted amongst rookie linebackers / safeties. Now, it wasn't all roses. He had a worse missed tackle rate than Campbell at 10.3% missed tackles. But it seemed like some of the mistakes he was making earlier were sitting and deciding, trying to figure out what to do, and getting to the position late. And you could see in some of those late games in Detroit against Detroit before he got kicked out, it's like hitting the hole, and he was doing that in the game before against Minnesota, getting the tackling ball carriers in the backfield and making some really good plays. I think what he has to do, he's always on a rookie contract. He's going to be around and not cost much.
And no one's going to mention this because of what happened in the Detroit game, which is just unacceptable. You can't do that. He was playing really good. He was having a really good game.
He was playing good ball.
Until that moment.
Gotta figure it out. Just don't be so hair trigger crazy. If somebody puts their hand on your arm or your shoulder, you just gotta dial it back a little bit so you don't. I don't know what it is, but he's like, God, I don't know. Is it just really severe personal bubble protection? Nobody, I don't know what it is.
It's just really about social distancing, Dad. It's just very serious about it. But anyway, I think I'm excited to see what he does next year. He clearly has some maturing to do because you just can't get kicked out of a game for shoving an athletic trainer who's trying to help their player on the what are you doing? That doesn't make any sense.
I'm shaking my head. Yeah, as he says that.
It's just it's mind-boggling. You can't. Yikes. No one does that. What are we doing here?
So hopefully that never happens again. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, and he tweeted out an apology and was like, "Yeah, I was wrong. I let my emotions get the best of me." That's step 1. Step 2 is not doing it again. So, we're willing to give you that.
At least it didn't seem like a non-apology apology that you hear a lot out there.
Yeah, which are always easy to spot.
Seemed like a real apology.
But beyond that, like you said, he lowest QBR when targeted amongst rookie linebackers, safeties. I think you said that was per Rob Paul on Twitter. And then the leading all rookies in PFF stops with 41 was per Zach Cruz on Twitter. He was very solid, and I think part of the reason I think he struggled at times is you got to remember he had to wear the green dot for 4 weeks, 5 weeks.
Yeah,
where he was the guy on defense, and that's hard when you're a rookie. That's tough.
And during those weeks, he couldn't be just
see ball get
unleashed
ball.
To just see ball get ball and just react and play on instinct. He's like, no, I got to think about what everybody's supposed to be doing here.
And also, when you're the guy with the green dot and the main guy's down, the guy next to you is not great, which kind of brings us to our next point. Isaiah McDuffie was the next kind of linebacker in the depth chart. 23 years old, will be 24 by the start of next season, going into his third year. Played 17 games, 11.4% missed tackle rate on defense.
We've got a theme here.
We got a theme. The Packers could not tackle this year. I know that's real earth-shattering news for all of you. We're
giving out the hot takes.
They were bad, and every individual was bad at tackling this year. Played 17 games. Yeah.
Sixth-round rookie. That's not rookie, but sixth-round pick. And he moved up to number 3 on the depth chart by the end of the year.
Yeah, and he only had one game where he was above 50% snaps on defense, and that was against Buffalo, which was kind of cool because that's where he's from. I think he had a couple solid games, but otherwise was pretty meh on defense. Where he did make his mark was on special teams. He was a very solid special teamer. I think that they should bring him back. He's not making any money, so they should bring him back just for his special teams prowess, because I think he was one of their better like special teamers, like getting downfield, making tackles. He kind of plays with his hair on fire. What hair he has left, he is slightly balding. No shade, but just to be accurate. I think going forward, they should, like this, unless they somehow draft a bunch of linebackers and have like a lot of talent there that they don't have right now, they should certainly bring him back, because just as a special teamer, he's a plus. That's at least how I see it. What do you think about McDuffie this year?
I always like some of his play traits, at least, aggressiveness going after the ball, trying to hit. Maybe he doesn't play, can't hold up, work his way off blocks so well, but I think I kind of like his play style anyway. And I think it's something they could use a little bit more of.
Yeah, I think his main problem is he's just small. Like, he's just kind of tiny out there, which is, it's not your fault. It's not his fault. But I think just as a special teamer, they should definitely bring him back. And that brings us to our last linebacker, Chris Barnes. Dad, take us home.
Yeah, so Barnes, he was, is going to be 23 by the next season. He was originally an undrafted free agent from UCLA and just basically started playing right away. He was like the secret player in the first COVID year. Like no tape, no preseason, no pictures from training camp. So they took advantage of that to cut him and then sign him back because nobody knew anything about him. And he played a lot in his career for, even starting his rookie year for that. Now this year he was hurt. He only played 6 games due to a serious injury in the first game of the year. And he had a 10% missed tackle rate. He came back in weeks 11 and 12, but then quickly lost snaps to McDuffie and got passed over on the depth chart. He's not currently under contract because his contract finished last year, as I think he was a exclusive rights free agent last year, so it's just a 1-year deal. And now he's a restricted free agent since he was originally a UDFA, and now they could tender him, but the cheapest tender is $2.6 million for the right of first refusal. And so, is he worth $2.6 million on the 1-year deal?
I think probably not, just because of the way he kind of fell down the depth chart. It's interesting though to me because before he got hurt in that Minnesota game, they were trotting him out there in 3 linebacker sets with Campbell and Quay Walker, which they kind of abandoned that entire notion as soon as he got hurt and never brought it back. But at least that's interesting to me, is that they kind of wanted to get him on the field. They liked what they saw with him to start the year. It's always hard. He had a very borderline season-ending injury that we thought we saw initially, and then he was able to come back for a handful of games at the end of the year. I know he wasn't great to end the year. It's tough when you have such a serious injury and you fight all the way back, and then people are like, well, you didn't play very well. It's like, well, it's a miracle I'm even playing at all, to be honest.
Right.
But
he was not playing many snaps by the end. He played a decent amount when he first came back, but then
he just wasn't
maybe
very
he just
good.
Wasn't quite right. He needed more time to get back to normal.
He looked worse than he had the past few years. I $2.6 million for a guy that might be 4th on your depth chart, though, is too much, right. I think. It's just not reasonable.
But I think they could sign him to it seems more likely that he's going to be a sort of a vet minimum kind of guy in the league wherever he goes, whether that be at Green Bay or not. I don't know.
Yeah,
but they might not. They might decide that the tender is going to be more than they want to pay him.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with him.
Means he has the freedom to go anywhere if they don't use the tender.
And I don't have a problem with him on a minimum. I think he's a fine player. He's a fine third, fourth guy. It's just you can't spend too much money on a guy who's probably not going to play many snaps. But anyway, Dad, let's talk just a little bit, winding down here, about the linebacker position just as a whole. Coaching-wise, Kirk Olivedati, Coach KO as they call him, has been the linebacker coach since 2019 under both Pettine and Barry. I think he's done an okay job. He coached Campbell's career year, decent Quay Walker rookie year. I think he's fairly safe. I think he's done enough with that position. I know the run game in general hasn't been good, but he's gotten players to play above what you would normally expect from them, I think is fair to say. Like Chris Barnes is a starter. That's more than anyone would have expected of him. Isaiah McDuffie at least having a good game. That's more than most people would expect of him. Getting Campbell not getting Campbell that first team All Pro, but putting Campbell in a position to win that first team All Pro. Getting Quay Walker rookie year, like I said, being I think overall a success. I think he's pretty safe.
Yeah, the other thing I remember thinking about last year, as it goes on, and Campbell's having such a great year, talk about whether Barry is like the inside linebacker whisperer.
Yeah, it's
where true. Inside linebackers seem to be having career years under him, though it didn't happen this year. Right? Yeah, and the one thing I would say in terms of how the unit is done, they regressed a lot this year compared to 2021.
That's true.
At least for the run defense. Their open field rank by DVOA was 3rd in 2021. And they fell all the way to 19th in 2022. Mm-hmm. And that's supposed to measure, both the linebackers and safeties performance against the run. Yeah.
And I mean, a down year, but I think not quite enough for him to be shown the door, I think.
Yeah. And I would say, they have they've invested in the position. I don't think they'll be doing anything big anymore.
No.
They already did a lot more
than expected.
Year.
Yes.
I saw people late in pre-draft season starting to mock inside linebackers to the Packers in the first round. I was like, that's insane.
I was like, clearly you know nothing about the Packers.
Clearly those guys do nothing about the Packers because the Packers don't value the position and they just signed to an extension inside linebacker. There's no way they're going to get one in the first round.
They're not going to take another linebacker. That's not how the Packers. And then here we are.
And here we are with a high value signed free agent at a first round
pick. Yeah. And I think that the front seven overall, let's kind of wrap this up, was I think a disappointment this year. But I think that there are causes for some optimism going forward. Getting Wyatt more snaps, getting Quay Walker more accustomed to playing in that role at the NFL level. Getting Campbell and him more used to each other, getting Slayton more snaps, getting Clark more over to 3-tech, getting Gary back hopefully healthy, knock on wood, getting Enagbare more developed, hopefully adding another piece at both interior D-line and edge would be super helpful. I think that there are definitely places that this front could improve and be a strength for the team going forward. It's close. I feel like it's close to being a good front seven. It's very close.
Yeah. I feel like there are pieces to be excited about at all three of these groups. That I think we have a good middle linebacker core. Even like as a third and fourth, like McDuffie was fine.
Barnes, yeah.
And Barnes. And you've got some intriguing talents coming up in the D-line group as well as in the edge group. Though I think we really need one more stud in the edge group.
Yes, which is easier said than done. But anyway, let's wrap it up here. As we talked about, we will be doing some more of these pods going forward. Next week, we'll be talking about the secondary, safeties, and corners and how those positions fared this year and how they look going forward. Got a lot to talk about, a lot to be excited about. We'll be doing offense right after that, and we'll be bringing you any Packers news you need. If you enjoy what you listen to, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We'd really appreciate it. We tweet out new episodes, any Packers news, notes from the offseason, mock drafts we've done, any different news articles we find interesting, stuff like that. You can go find it there. Once again, that's at FatherSonPacker. If you really like what you listen to, come subscribe to us on YouTube. We'd really appreciate it. It would really help our numbers. Father Son Packers podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, etc. Anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find us. Thank you again so much for listening. We'll be doing one of these a week through the off season. Can't wait to talk about the draft. And Dad, until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.